Hello, my name is John Butler. I am the Outreach Manager for the Gwinnett County Department of Water Resources. I'm going to take a little time today to talk with you about household hazardous wastes. Household hazardous wastes are those types of items that come from our homes that are either toxic, ignitable, corrosive, or reactive. One of the most common types of household hazardous waste that almost all of us have in our homes right now is gasoline. This right here meets all four of the criteria for being a household hazardous waste. And like I say, almost all of us have this in our homes to use in our yard equipment, and we come in contact with that every day, even when we're at the gas pump. So it's not that household hazardous wastes are all dangerous. It's just that there is some considerations that we need to take when we're handling or storing, and especially when it comes time to dispose of them. I've got some examples here for you of some other common household hazardous wastes. Pesticides and herbicides as well. I've got some household cleaners. We've got a light bulb. We've got regular batteries, and this would also include automotive batteries. We've got some automotive fluids, and we've got some paint products. This is going to be our agenda for the video today. We're going to talk about each of these things and get into some specifics about how we can responsibly dispose of or hopefully recycle some of these materials. Before we get into all that, you may be wondering, why is somebody from the Department of Water Resources talking about this? Shouldn't it be somebody from the Solid Waste Division or Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful? Well, it turns out Gwinnett Solid Waste and Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful, as well as the UGA Extension Service here in Gwinnett County, have all been partnering with Water Resources for a few years to put on a household hazardous waste workshop. And it turns out that's where most of the information that we're going to talk about today has come from. But I'm here today because improperly disposed of household hazardous waste often ends up in our environment or in our waterways and can negatively affect water quality. And that is something that the Department of Water Resources deals with every day. You see, a lot of household hazardous waste is improperly disposed of into the stormwater drainage system. This is that series of drains that runs along our roads and in our parking lots, as well as the ditches that run alongside the roads or maybe through our backyards. This system wasn't designed and was never intended to treat or filter the runoff that enters that system. It's really only intended to relieve flooding, to get the water off of our roadways and our parking lots and into the nearest waterway. So when a household hazardous waste is improperly disposed of into a storm drain like this, the next time it rains, that waste is going to flow through the system and enter into a stream body, and that can lead to water pollution. So how do you know if a product is a household hazardous waste? We've already gone over the definition, and there's some tips on each of these labels that can help you out, and I'll show you a couple of examples of that. Toilet bowl cleaner. If you look at the back of this and you read that, right here it says the word danger, and right after that it says corrosive. Well, corrosive is one of our 4 parts of the definition for household hazardous waste, so we know that this toilet bowl cleaner falls into that category. Another example that we can look at here, got a can of lubricant. Danger, that's a good key right there. And then it says flammable, which is basically the same thing as ignitable. That's another good indicator that you've got a household hazardous waste on your hands. In fact, all of those warning signs like warning, caution, danger, any of those listed on the label tend to indicate that that material is a household hazardous waste. Now, there's one more thing I'm going to mention before we get into going through all these examples, and that's the 3 R's: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Except that I'm going to add a 4th R, and that's rethink. I'm going to talk about that first, because if you don't have a household hazardous waste in your home, then you don't have to worry about how to get rid of it. Think about the situation in another way. Is there another way that you can deal with the problem that doesn't involve using one of these household hazardous wastes? Next comes reduce. This is where you want to beware of the buy one, get one sales or the free 20% in the bottle. If you don't need that extra amount, then don't buy it, because you're more likely to have it left over to have to get rid of it later on. All right, next comes reuse. All right, you've got some leftover material. Maybe if it's paint, you can reuse it on a crafting project or let the kids have some fun with it. If it's another type of material, maybe a neighbor can use it, or you can even donate it to a place that might be able to make use of it. So think about ways to reuse these materials instead of trying to get rid of them. And then last is recycle. A lot of these materials can be recycled, and there's a lot of options for that available, especially if you check with Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful. On their website, they have their recycling directory that can help you find some outlets for all this. In addition to that, if it's something that you really need to get rid of, Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful and the Department of Water Resources partners twice a year to hold household hazardous waste collection events where we can take all of these materials off your hands and either recycle or dispose of them safely and responsibly. All right, so let's look at some of these household hazardous waste. We'll start with pesticides. We all know that pesticides are toxic. They're poison. They kill pests, whether that's insects or if that's weeds or even if that's some sort of a fungus on one of your plants. And if you have questions about pesticides, pesticide usage, a great outlet for information is the Gwinnett Extension Service. They're part of UGA. They've got lots of really good information to give you about, selecting and using pesticides. Rethink if you really need to use a pesticide in every situation. There's a lot of opportunities where you can accomplish getting rid of a pest without even using a pesticide. For example, if you've got a few weeds in the yard that you can fairly easily go and hand pull, or maybe go send the kids to hand pull, that doesn't require any chemicals at all. This guy right here, your garden hoe, this can be your best friend to easily get rid of some of the weeds in your yard without using any chemicals at all. You may also think, well, maybe there's a do-it-yourself option that I can use to be a little bit safer, a little bit less toxic. And that's true. It's worth noting that a lot of the do-it-yourself pesticide mixtures that you can use, they're not going to be as effective as some of the chemical counterparts. That's not to say don't do it. It's just to understand that if you go that route, a lot of times you're going to find yourself applying that more frequently or on kind of a regular basis. It may take more than once in order to accomplish the goal. Now, I'm not going to give any specific recipes for a do-it-yourself mixture because mixing those things up wrong can actually cause harm to some of your plants if you're using it outside or in the garden. So I'll leave it to you to do your research to find the right recipe that you want, talk to some of your gardening buddies to find the right mixture of things that you're comfortable with. But I'll give you a couple ideas to get you started. Let's talk about vinegar and water. That's a real common herbicide, something that can kill weeds. You just take a regular old squirt bottle like this. You choose your mixture that you want, fill this up, and squirt that directly onto the leaves of the plant that you're trying to kill. Now keep in mind, vinegar will kill every plant. So you want to be very accurate. When you're doing something like that, instead of using it in the lawn, which could perhaps create an unintended dead spot, it's a good idea to use something like that in the cracks of your driveway or in the weeds that are growing up between the bricks in your patio. Another real common one is insecticidal soap. There's lots of recipes that you can find for that as well. Use the same type of squirt bottle. Use a different squirt bottle than your vinegar mixture. It's a good idea to label that squirt bottle. But you take that insecticidal soap, and if you see these little bugs crawling on the underside of your leaves, either indoors or outdoors, a lot of times that type of do-it-yourself insecticidal soap can be really effective in controlling some of those insects. Another option that's kind of commonly overlooked sometimes for controlling pests is something like a sticky trap or a glue board. These have no chemicals on them at all, but they're really sticky and it's really easy to capture some insects that might be crawling around, especially indoors. And the good thing about these sticky traps is you can kind of place them strategically under appliances or in the backs of cabinets, and that can help you find where an insect is actually coming from. Once you've determined where you're seeing the most of them in the backs of those cabinets, you will often, if you go and investigate, find a hole or a crack that you can then seal up, and then the bugs will stop coming altogether, and there's no chemicals necessary. Once they don't have access to the food or water source that they're coming into the home for, they'll just eventually dissipate. And so that's a really good way to not use any chemicals at all. Another good non-chemical method that you can use to deter some pests outdoors is some certain types of plants, like a marigold is a really good example. A lot of insect pests, they see that, they smell that, they understand that marigolds are actually toxic to the bugs. And by having marigolds around your garden, mixed in with your flower beds, that can actually effectively deter a lot of pests. And it turns out there's a lot of plants that can do that. So going back to UGA Extension in Gwinnett is a great way to understand what some of those plant options are and add some of those plants into your landscape. All right, so if you do choose to go with your more conventional chemical pesticides, there's a few things that you need to consider. And that first and foremost is to read and follow the label instructions. When you're using these materials, it's not the time to say, well, this calls for 1 ounce, so I'll use 2. Not a good idea when you're talking about using these types of pesticides, which are toxic or poison. Another thing that you'll want to consider is to always store your pesticides in their original containers. If you're mixing a concentrate or you're parceling out those materials, try to avoid using a consumable product packaging like a drink bottle or something to mix that up. If you take a look at these 2 examples, you can see both of these bottles look like the drink item that belongs in that bottle, but in fact both of these examples contain a pesticide. One is an insecticide, one is an herbicide, and you can see how that could be very easily mistaken by a child or even a grown-up who's helping you in the yard as something that might taste really good to drink, and we want to make sure that we can avoid that type of confusion. Now, when you're dealing with your pesticides, the best thing to do is to use them all. So remember, don't buy more than you would actually need. If you can't use the whole thing, this is a time to think about sharing it with a neighbor. Somebody down the street, next door neighbor, one of your friends, they may have a need to be able to use it so that you can get rid of that bottle. Once your bottle is empty, you can take it and triple rinse it. And so you'll want to rinse that bottle out and pour that into something disposable, a disposable cup or another container. Rinse that bottle 3 times and then use that rinse water, okay? Use that as directed in the yard or on your application. And then take that empty bottle, punch some holes in it so that it can't be reused, and then you can dispose of it in the trash or into the recycling. And that prevents that bottle from being reused or mixed with anything where the original contents could become harmful. Now, there's another thing about using pesticides that can really help you make the right choice on what products to use or if to use a product at all. Take a look at this diagram. This is commonly referred to as the disease triangle, and some professors and researchers at the University of Georgia have developed this. And what it's basically saying is that if any one of the 3 conditions on the outside of the triangle are not right, then the plant is likely to suffer. And so if you've got the wrong plant in the wrong part of the yard, it doesn't matter how much herbicide or pesticide you add to it, the plant's not going to be healthy. That's going to allow an infestation to occur. Some plants are placed too close together and they can't get enough airflow between them. And no matter what you put on it, that reduced airflow is always going to encourage some sort of disease because it's not healthy. The plant's not able to be healthy on its own. The UGA extension is a great reference to go to help get advice on, do I have this plant in the right location? What's another plant that I could put in this location? Where should I move this? What are the needs, the environmental needs of this plant that I could adjust that will reduce the need for any sort of pesticide applications? All right, so let's talk about some household cleaners. This is something that we've all got our arsenal of cleaners in the house to deal with any of the cleaning needs that we have. It's important here to remember not to mix these substances. That's kind of where that reactive part of the household hazardous waste definition comes into play. A lot of these materials don't mix. So if you're having a hard time cleaning something, wait for that cleaner to dissipate, give it a few days, rinse it really well. Make sure that you're not mixing these chemicals. Let's talk a little bit about bleach. This is something we pretty much all have in the laundry room. Bleach in and of itself is very caustic, meaning it has a high pH. If bleach is improperly disposed of, say into a storm drain, and it gets washed into a creek or a waterway, it can greatly badly affect the pH of the water there, which can have a negative impact on the wildlife living in that waterway. And basically, when we affect the wildlife, when we have fish that die off, we have insects that die off, that stream becomes unhealthy. And we want to make sure that we've got healthy waterways in our environment for all of us to react with. In fact, a lot of these cleaners can be bad for the environment or bad for ourselves. This is just furniture polish, but it's still harmful or fatal if swallowed. That means it's toxic. So a lot of things you might not expect are definitely also household hazardous wastes. Moving on to light bulbs. This is a compact fluorescent bulb. You may also have some of the long fluorescent tubes. There's all kinds of different light bulbs, and a lot of them actually can contain mercury, and mercury is highly toxic. Now, if this bulb breaks, or especially those fluorescent tubes, when those bulbs break, the mercury that's inside can become a really fine dust and can be released up into the air, where you could actually inhale those particles, and that could be really bad for our health, obviously. And so it's really important when you're talking about light bulbs that these are handled and disposed of properly in such a way that they won't break in the garbage truck, or even at the landfill. And that generally means dropping them off somewhere where they can be properly disposed of. You'll find most of our hardware stores, or many of our hardware stores, will accept light bulbs. And so you can go to Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful's recycling directory, or you can just call your favorite hardware store and ask if they have a collection service, and then ask them how to package the bulbs. Each one may have a little bit of different way for you to wrap them up to bring them to them, and they can take them. This is also something that we will accept at the household hazardous waste collection events. Moving on to batteries. There's lots of different types of batteries. Most of them can be recycled. So here again, our household hazardous waste collection events, we can take any of the batteries that you see here. We can take auto batteries, but also a lot of the battery stores and even cell phone stores will have a program where they can take back these types of batteries, or your cell phone batteries. Auto parts stores will often take the car batteries back from you. It's a good idea to call ahead. There may be a little bit of a fee associated with that. And it's also a good idea to make sure that the battery is not leaking. So if you've ever seen even just a regular AA battery like this, if you've ever seen one that's old, or it's been in an appliance for too long and it's got that kind of green fuzzy, blue fuzzy stuff on it, that's actually corrosion, because there is acid and usually lead or a heavy metal inside of this battery. And that's something you want to be really careful with when you're handling it. It's something you would use with gloves, and you would want to package that a certain way. So if you have a busted battery, handle with care. Make sure that you call whoever you're going to be dropping it off with for advice on how to bring that to them. All right, look into automotive fluids. How many folks out there are still doing their own oil changes or tune-ups? There's a few of us out there that are still doing this. And it turns out that the byproducts of those that car maintenance is definitely going to be household hazardous wastes. It only takes 1 quart of motor oil to contaminate 1 million gallons of water. That's according to the EPA. And so it doesn't take much to have a big impact. And unfortunately, one of the common discharges the Department of Water Resources sees into storm drains is used motor oil. This is completely unnecessary, because almost every auto parts store and some of the service garages will take that used oil from you. So if you're a do-it-yourselfer and you're doing your oil changes at home, it's a really good idea to have the proper container and collect that oil, package it up, and bring it to the auto parts store nearby, and they will generally take that to dispose of it for you. In addition to that, maybe you've got some brake fluid, all right, antifreeze, transmission fluid, any of the other automotive fluids. Not every single auto parts store will take it, but some of them will. And again, we can take this at the household hazardous waste events. So check with Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful on their website for the recycling directory, and see if you can find a place near you that can dispose of this for you. All right, the last thing that we're going to talk about today is really the most common, and that's paint. Over the last year, Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful, Gwinnett Water Resources, and also the Gwinnett Solid Waste Division, we have held in partnership 4 events in the last year. And in those 4 events, we've collected over 16,000 gallons of paint for recycling or for disposal. That's a lot of paint, and we all have it hanging around in our garages, in our basements. Some of it's very old. We're not going to use it. We don't know what it was for. We don't like that color, and we need to get rid of it. So there's 2 types of paint in this category. Latex paint is really easy to recycle, especially if it's not too old. So what happens is that paint is collected and similar colors are blended together and repackaged. And there's a ton of charities that take that paint out into the community here in the United States, but also all around the world. And that paint is used to give a new paint job to schools or to hospitals or to people's homes and a lot of different community organizations that can really help those places out and give them a new coat, kind of a fresh start. So it's a really great charity to participate in. There's also oil-based paints, and oil-based paints are flammable. So that's not as easily recycled, but it can be reused. It turns out oil-based paints can be blended into fuels for industrial applications. And there's also, kind of in that flammable category, there's also all the stains and the varnishes and different things that are kind of those paint-related products that can also be taken and sometimes blended and used as those fuels for the industrial applications, or at least when we collect those at the household hazardous waste events, we can dispose of those things properly and safely. But it's not always a good idea to bring all your paint to us because of that vast amount that we collect. It really helps us out a lot if you bring us the good stuff, because you have a few options to get rid of that paint at home. So if you're looking at a paint can that is half full, you've actually got a pretty easy ability to be able to dispose of that at home. We can't dispose of liquid paint at home, but if it's been solidified, you can. So you can use stuff like sawdust or shredded newspaper or cat litter to solidify that paint. And once it's hardened up, you can dispose of that into the trash can. All right, so I've got a couple of cans of paint here. Let's take a look and see what we've got inside. Both of these are obviously pretty old. Here we go. We got a can of paint, it's 3/4 full. It's pretty old. This is something that I would say take into the recycle event, let them determine if they can reuse it or not, but either way they'd be able to dispose of that for you. All right, let's take a look at this one. This one, definitely old, probably not reusable, and I'm gonna go ahead and just dispose of this. And to do that, I'm gonna use this cat litter. Cat litter is cheap, it's abundant, it's easy to use, and it's really good at absorbing stuff, especially paint. So what you wanna do is you wanna pour enough cat litter in to just about cover the amount of paint that's inside your can. You can tell that paint's old because that cat litter didn't even sink in. And I don't have a paint stick, so I'm just going to use a piece of firewood. But you want to get that down in there and give it a little stir. And once you feel it start to get thick, which this really is not quite there yet, you're good. So I'm going to add some more. And keep stirring it. You can see all that liquid paint coming up from the bottom there. And this is getting really thick and chunky, which is good because we don't want this paint to go into a trash can, a trash truck maybe, and leak out onto the road. We don't want it to get into the landfill and mix with something that it shouldn't mix with. We want it to be in a solid form. That's how we can much more safely dispose of it. That's getting pretty good and mixed. Let's add a little more just for good measure. All right. That is pretty good and solid there, or at least solidified, no longer a liquid. Now at this point, awesome. At this point, you can take this, let it sit out for a few days, maybe a week with the top off so the air can get in there and continue to solidify it. But then come back, put the top back on it. Probably want to use a real hammer. Put the top back on it, and then it's ready to be disposed of in the garbage. All right, the last thing about paint cans is empty paint cans. And we do see a lot of folks that want to bring those into the recycling event. And it's great to be aware or be responsible about that. But it turns out if the paint in the can is already completely dried, then you can just go ahead and throw that away in the solid waste with your regular trash. And that's the best way to manage those empty paint cans. So throughout this video, you've heard me mention a few of the organizations that I partner with, and that's the Gwinnett Solid Waste Division, Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful, and UGA Extension here in Gwinnett County. And all of these organizations have excellent staff available that can either help you get the information you need or can give you the guidance and resources that you need to gain some information about how to handle, how to dispose of, how to choose the right materials for the right task. And when those things are household hazardous waste, we've already learned, that's all the more reason for us to be cautious and aware of the way we're handling those things, and especially the way that we're disposing of those things. So let's take a look at the Gwinnett Clean and Beautiful Recycling Directory. We talked about batteries a good bit. Where can I go to recycle some alkaline batteries? Just go to gwinnettcb.org, click on recycling, and select a material from the green drop-down menu. I'll see here. I see that there are locations in Tucker, Buford, Lawrenceville, and Snellville, all an easy drive from anywhere in the county, where I can take these alkaline batteries to drop them off. So that's it for today. I hope this has been informative for you and that you've learned a little bit of information you can take home to help protect the health and the safety of your family and our environment. There's a lot of people in Gwinnett County, and it's never just one discharge that can get into our waterways. It's so important that we take that extra step to properly dispose of or recycle our household hazardous waste so that we can protect streams like this, streams that flow through our backyards and our parks, that our kids and dogs play in, and that our wildlife depend on for their habitat. It's so important that we keep those clean and healthy so that we can all share them. Thank you very much.